A United States Air Force general once explained to his subordinate why he stopped having sex. He said, "Captain, I have been following this thing very carefully for years, ever since the commies introduced it. The facts are there, if anyone takes the trouble to study them. Did you know that in addition to fluoridating water, there are studies underway to fluoridate salt, liquor, fruit juices, soup, sugar, milk, and ice cream? Ice cream, Captain. Children's ice cream. It began in 1946. 1946, Captain." Well, how does that coincide with the post-war communist conspiracy? Incredibly obvious, isn't it? A foreign substance is introduced into the precious body fluids without the knowledge of the individual. Certainly without any choice. That's the way commies work. His subordinate, a British officer, visibly calculating the odds of survival, asked when the general first developed this theory. Well, the general corrects him. It's not a theory, it's an absolute awareness of an absolute absurdity. I became aware of it, Captain, during the physical act of love. A profound sense of fatigue, a feeling of emptiness followed. Luckily, I was able to interpret those feelings correctly, the loss of essence. I can assure you, it has not recurred, Captain. Women sense my power and they seek the life essence. I do not avoid women, Captain, but I deny them the essence. That's General Jack D. Ripper. Dr. Strangelove, 1964. Kubrick made that film while I was in the womb. Opened right after Dallas, JFK. The world needed to laugh at something too terrifying to cry about. 62 years later, General Ripper has a Senate confirmation hearing. The precious bodily fluids are flourishing. I'm Mark Roach. Tonight I'm talking about why we keep casting the same movie with different actors and calling it news.
You said you'd never change, but then you flipped the switch. You smiled through.
It's Saturday, March 21st. The Aries Equinox opened this morning. Mercury went direct. Mars and Jupiter are trining somewhere overhead, with the astrologers telling me this is a powerful window for bold, aligned action. The United States Senate spent 4 days this week debating a bill everyone in the room knows cannot pass the filibuster. Bold, aligned action. But first, Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth is the Secretary of Defense. Before his confirmation, senators from his own party raised concerns about his drinking. Reports showing up of him impaired at work functions. An affidavit from his ex-sister-in-law. A pattern that worried people who had to be in rooms with him. And so Pete Hegseth, in order to be confirmed as the civilian in charge of the most powerful military on earth, promised to stop drinking. He promised. The Senate said, good enough. Now, promising to change in order to get the thing you want is a distinguished American tradition. It is the backbone of the job interview, the first date, and roughly 40% of prenuptial agreements. But we're talking about the nuclear football. The man closest to the nuclear football looked the United States Senate in the eye and said, "Give me the bombs and I'll put down the bottle." And then there's Senator Markwayne Mullin of Oklahoma, who during that same confirmation hearing while Hegseth was being questioned about his drinking, suggested that some sitting senators also show up drunk to vote. He said that, and out loud, as a defense. The defense of a man accused of drinking on the job was that everyone drinks on the job. That is not a Senate hearing. This is an AA meeting with a quorum and a C-SPAN feed. General Ripper protected the purity of American power by denying women his essence. Pete Hegseth promised to protect American power by denying himself alcohol. Same sentence, same noun. Kubrick just got it a decade wrong. This year, Sean Penn won Best Supporting Actor for playing a corrupt military villain in a war film. Then he skipped the Oscars, flew to Ukraine. Now, before we go any further, I want you to understand something about Sean Penn. Sean Penn has been doing this Brando for 40 years. Not consciously, not as an imitation, as aspiration. The mumbling intensity, the deliberate refusal to be charming on cue, the barely suppressed contempt for the whole apparatus of celebrity while remaining inescapably one of the most celebrated members. Brando refused the Oscar in 1973 and sent Sacheen Littlefeather to protest Hollywood's treatment of Native Americans. The room booed. History happened. Sean Penn looked at that moment and thought, I can top that. So he previously offered to melt his Oscars down as ammunition for Ukraine. He actually gave one to Zelenskyy, which means Volodymyr Zelenskyy, president, wartime leader, former comedian who played the president on TV before becoming the actual president, is in an actual war, which is either the most method acting casting in history or the most terrifying LinkedIn update ever filed. Zelenskyy now owns an Academy Award. So I want to be in that room. Sean Penn walks in, method actor, most intense present human being Hollywood has produced in 50 years, carrying a gold statue looking like a man who prepared by not sleeping for 3 days and reading Camus. And Zelenskyy, who's been awake for 2 years running a live-action war while fielding calls from world leaders, celebrities, and apparently Sean Penn, has to receive this Oscar with appropriate gravitas. Zelensky's just happy someone famous showed up. And somewhere overhead, large chair, the way he always sat, daring the room to be interesting enough for him, Brando's ghost is watching all of this. Not with bitterness, but with genuine amusement, because Brando knew. He knew when he sent Sacheen Littlefeather that the gesture would be remembered and the cause would be forgotten. And he didn't do it because he thought it would work. He did it because he couldn't sit in a tuxedo and pretend. And now here is Sean Penn 40 years later with a large gesture, a larger conflict, and the same basic result. The reservation is still the reservation. The war is still the war. And we're still giving out gold men to people who noticed. Brando's ghost is not surprised. He's impressed by the production value, but he is not surprised.
You don't feel a thing. You don't feel a thing. Maniac, you're out of your mind. Maniac, you've crossed the line.
Early in my career, I worked in oil. A rich kid, the kind who grew up knowing the right rooms and the right handshakes, the ones that can't be learned, pulled me aside and told me with complete sincerity that there was nothing sexier than being in the oil business, Mark. He had a driver, a Rolex, and opinions about Pebble Beach that suggested he'd done things on the shoreline that would make a caddy file a formal complaint. He was chasing significance, the way powerful men chase it, acquire enough force that the world has to acknowledge you. Drill until you hit something. And it worked. The way most gifts work, just often enough to keep you religious about it. Here is what you learn watching a man drill for meaning. Eventually, he's not finding oil. He's making a very expensive hole and calling it progress. I was never there for the toast. I was there for the education, waiting for the day the background shifts. Not the rules, not the players, not the legislation, not the Oscar, not the Senate floor time. The background. Yale published a study last week showing that violence leaves heritage epigenetic markers on the genome. Chemical, biological. The body records what happened to your grandfather and forwards this to your file. Your nervous system is running programs written before you were born. You may have heard of Bruce Lipton, a cellular biologist, not a wellness brand. He shows children's brains in a theta download state from the state of pregnancy through the age of 7. 70% of what it gets is recorded as disempowering. 95% of adult behavior runs from those programs on autopilot. You did not choose them. You do not know you're running them. So apply that to a family under economic siege and racial threat for 400 years. The nervous system doesn't know history ended. It knows what the house felt like. And then we hand that nervous system to a voter ID card and call it justice. The racial wealth gap in 1875 years after emancipation was 23-1. 150 years of progress later, it's 6-1. And at this rate, we hit equality in 2340. Mark your calendars. Your great-great-great-great-grandchildren will be briefly celebrated. We keep installing new software on old hardware. Civil Rights Act, Affirmation Action, DEI, the SAVE Act. You cannot run those programs on a nervous system still running in 1619 firmware. Which brings me back to Sean Penn, because here's the thing about Sean Penn going to the Ukraine with an Oscar. He is not wrong. He is not cynical. He is not performing for the cameras, or if he is, he has convinced himself so completely that the performance and the sincerity are indistinguishable, which is either the highest achievement of method acting or a description of everyone who has ever marched in a protest or posted a black square. He feels it. The gesture's real. The gesture's also structurally the same gesture Brando made in 1973. And Brando made it knowing it wasn't enough. And Brando's ghost is up there somewhere right now watching Penn do the upgraded version with better cinematography and a live war backdrop. And the ghost is not shaking its head. The ghost is nodding because the gesture isn't the problem. The gesture is what you do when the body knows something the system can't process. You make the gesture. You make it as real as you can, and then you understand slowly that the system is not listening. Not because it's evil, but because it's running older code than you are. The oil business ran its course for me, not dramatically, it just did. And at some point, I understood the difference between acquiring force and actually moving something. The rich kid is still drilling. The caddy has a therapist. And I have this show on a Saturday night, which is either a lateral move or a significant upgrade, depending on how you feel about the current state of the Oscars. One thing. General Ripper's war room is not a metaphor. It's a room. It exists. Redecorated several times. Same furniture, same certainty. Same men, same foreign substance and precious bodily fluids. Different noun every decade. The difference between Kubrick's War Room and this week's Senate floor is not the bombs, not the generals, not the absolute certainty of the men at the table. The difference is now everyone outside the room has a microphone. We can see it live. We can compare this week to 1962. Note that choreography is identical. Post the comparison, receives the likes, and go to sleep. And the room keeps running. Somewhere overhead, Brando's ghost has been watching this whole show. He watched Hegseth promise sobriety for the nuclear football. He watched Penn on hand to get an Oscar or to get a comedian running the real war. He watched 4 days of the Senate floor time scheduled for a bill that cannot pass. The ghost is not outraged. The ghost is not despairing. The ghost is sitting in that larger chair, the way he always sat, and he's laughing, not at us exactly, more the way that you laugh when you've seen the punchline coming for 50 years and it still lands exactly as written. Because Brando knew in 1973 what Kubrick knew in 1964. You can't think your way out of this. You never could. The only move, the only ones that have ever worked, is to stop pretending the war room is somewhere else. Protect your essence. One thing this week, notice the gap between what you feel and what you actually do. Don't fix it. Don't post about it. Don't schedule floor time. Just see it. You can't reprogram firmware you won't acknowledge is running. That's the whole move. The Equinox opened this morning. Mercury's direct. Whatever you've been carrying away from the old cycle, your grandfather's program, the general certainty, the gesture that never quite landed, the window is open to set it down. Not by thinking harder about it, just by noticing it's there. Kubrick made Dr. Strangelove because the world had just watched its own war room fire a real shot, and nobody knew what to do except laugh. We are still laughing at the same room. The difference is now we know it's ours. I'm Mark Roach. This was Headroom Tonight. Brando called it in 1973. Kubrick called it in 64. We just thought it was a comedy. Turns out, it still is.
You smile through all the chaos like you don't feel a thing. Maniac, you're out of your mind. Maniac, you've crossed the line. You're crazy and you know it's true. Maniac, I'm done with you. You cut the brakes at midnight. You set the bridge on